Hi, I want to talk to you today about a terrific book called Writing Fiction by Janet Burroway that I've taught a number of times in creative writing classes and that I've also used when tutoring aspiring creative writers, as well as consulted when I am writing my own fiction, which has been a sporadic activity over the last 25 years. I've had a grand total of two short stories published and one novel accepted for publication in 2025. So take this, for what it's worth, as someone who hasn't exactly hit the bestseller lists. But Burroway's book, I think, is terrific for a bunch of different reasons. For starters, it helps to move us beyond the classic advice of the creative writing workshop and class, which is show, don't tell. That advice is helpful to some extent, but only goes so far. How do you do that? Well, one way, okay, it has to do with emotion, or feelings of any kind, really. And there's great advice in the book from a man named John LaRue, an accomplished fiction writer in his own right, and actually someone I met while I was studying at Stanford. And he advises to get control of the emotion by not mentioning it. Okay, so don't say that your character is feeling angry or sad or scared. Give us the sensory detail, the thing that person perceives, that is making them feel a certain way. Because often our feelings are mixed. So we might feel a mixture, let's say, of sadness and fear, or a mixture of surprise and dismay all at the same time. Give us like what that feeling might do to someone's body, how it makes them feel, their behavior, something that that they do with their face or their hands that indicates what their feeling is. Don't interpret that for the reader, okay? Because once you've done that interpretation, the reader's mind just kind of stops working, and moves on to the next thing already, when you want them to be sort of arrested and to have a similar emotional gut level response to the thing that you're describing. So yeah, always keeping like the five senses in mind when you're writing something. Is there any way to appeal to our sense of sight, our sense of smell, touch, taste, and so forth, or hearing? Now, one of the finer points that I really appreciated in this book is a warning against doing something that I see all the time in works by, let's call them, less experienced writers, or experienced writers who've forgotten, their writing 101 instructions, which is to avoid something that Burroway refers to as filtering, okay? Which is essentially, the narrator layering, sort of almost a filter between the thing that the character is experiencing and our experience of that same thing. So what's an example? I'll read a little passage from John Gardner, who is cited in Burroway's text and who wrote an excellent book called The Art of Fiction. That's a little old-fashioned, but has some wisdom in it. Anyway, this is Gardner, who is asking us to avoid filtering. He says, the needless filtering of the image through some observing consciousness is problematic. The amateur, that's Gardner's word, writes, turning, she noticed two snakes fighting in among the rocks. Compare, she turned. In among the rocks, two snakes were fighting. Okay, so we don't need to know that she noticed this. If we're told, that this thing is happening, we can put two and two together and assume that she has perceived it as well. And presumably she's going to react in some way. Gardner goes on, generally speaking, vividness urges that almost every occurrence of such phrases as she noticed and she saw, and I would add she thought or she felt, all these phrases should be suppressed. Get rid of them and just represent the thing that is being seen. All right. And there's also another problem with that amateur sentence that Gardner refers to. Turning, she noticed two snakes fighting. And that verb turning, that gerund ing ending, implies a simultaneity, okay, of the action of turning with the action of noticing. And that's not the case, right? And you see this, it's even more obvious in something that you see a lot in, like, action type fiction by, again, inexperienced writers. The sentence would read something like, turning, he shot the assailant right between the eyes. Well, that's simply impossible. You cannot turn and simultaneously, aim precisely and shoot at someone. You have to turn first, take your aim, and then shoot. And this is the kind of small mistake that shows that basic inattention to the realistic way of presenting stuff. Anyway, it's just something that another fault in that sentence, you could say. And when you're avoiding filtering, you're avoiding the chance to introduce more mistakes of that sort. Burroway also does a really good job of explaining the difference in styles of narration between summary and scene, right? And both are appropriate under given circumstances, right? Sometimes it's not important to present a scene of characters interacting. Sometimes you can just summarize what happened for that 10 minutes of their conversation, or indeed for a whole year where nothing much happened. What you want to look for and the things that are worth describing in scenes are what Burroway calls moments or patterns of conflict and connection. Where basically characters are getting together and either, resolving some tension between them, or building up further tension, or making a decision together. And she gives a name to the kind of dialogue that really helps in those moments, and she calls it no dialogue. In other words, moments when the characters are saying no to each other, not necessarily literally saying no, but just kind of reacting to what the other person is saying in a way that shows that they are not really in full agreement, or that one person wants the other to do something or feel a certain way, and the other person is resisting that. That really is important in building tension. After all, what's the point of recording a conversation where people are agreeing with each other? That's the kind of conversation that could easily be summarized. So anyway, again, this is a book that I've taught many times, and if anyone is interested in writing fiction, buy the book. It's literally called Writing Fiction, A Guide to Narrative Craft, by Janet Burroway. I think it's been through 10, 11 editions by now. I think any edition will serve your purposes pretty well. I've taught it multiple times over the years, and the only thing that really changes is the stories that she uses to illustrate her points. Maybe, I don't know why they've rotated the stories so heavily, but any edition, I think, carries the basic messages that I've outlined here. Thanks for listening.